What if I told you that Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, one of the greatest anime of all time, has one fatal flaw? The very first episode. And I'm going to tell you exactly why right now. Now look, I understand the intentions behind wanting to start the show like this, but in my opinion, it probably confused and maybe even turned away more people than it's helped to get into the show. Let me start with a brief recap in case you forgot what happened, or if you haven't seen the show at all, or if you've been told to skip this episode by a very good friend that you should probably appreciate more. Skip ahead to this time marker if you remember everything clearly. Edward and Alphonse are tasked by the military to go after a former state alchemist named Isaac the Freezer, who should have froze production on this f***ing episode. Okay, bad joke, I know. Anyways, Bradley tells Mustang to tell Edward and Alphonse to chase after the freezing alchemist. Isaac defeats some random military people, and then Edward finally shows up and starts showing off his skills. Isaac's taken into custody, but pulls a fast one and gets away. Mustang is pissed. Isaac talks to Kimberly. Isaac then continues setting up his attack on the city until he's discovered by Mustang. Mustang, being the flame alchemist, is basically the worst guy he could go up against. He escapes Mustang just to get cut off by the Elric brothers. But it's too late. Isaac activates a citywide transmutation circle and an ice mountain appears. Ed and Al believe that he's probably using a philosopher's stone to be able to do something of this feat. Isaac asks Edward if he really knows what's going on in Central. Mustang and Armstrong try to stop the transmutation, and Edward and Al fight Isaac until Isaac knocks Alphonse's helmet off, revealing there's nothing inside the suit. He realized they must have performed the greatest taboo. Isaac gets away again, but gets caught a few seconds later by King Bradley, who cuts him down with inhuman speed. As his blood spills, a red stone, presumably a philosopher's stone, rolls and turns into dust. And that's basically the gist of it. Now I get why starting off the show with some more generic fighting might have felt like a good idea at first to help the audience ease into things, but god damn it, I wish they didn't do it. I actually wish that I didn't even watch it. This episode feels completely out of place from the rest of the show that comes afterward. Its idea of throwing you into the action actually feels more alienating than anything, because the thoughtful, thought-provoking masterpiece of a show that comes after isn't what's provided here. It's a cheap cops and robbers episode for the sake of putting the action first, but that isn't the purpose of FMA. Don't get me wrong, this show has amazing action moments that are really fun to watch, but it has an amazing story to back it. And this episode in particular is just a random moment tossed into the timeline without any actual need. Instead of introducing us to the heart of the Elric brothers' journey, we are handed a forgettable side story. Think about some other great animes in their first episodes. Attack on Titan, for example, or Death Note, or Promised Neverland Season 1, or Frieren. These shows grab you by your heartstrings, not just with action. Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood could have done that too, but it chose to start with a very clunky first episode filled with nothing substantially useful to the story. On top of that, it introduces way too much. Warning for slight spoilers ahead if you haven't seen the show. Also, it's crazy that you haven't seen the show, but the first episode acts as a spoiler in itself of the entire series. It gives King Bradley an ominous tone almost immediately, rather than allowing that character to build up into who he truly is. Isaac feeds the audience the whole doubt the government spiel, and that leads the audience in that direction without trying to let them form their own opinions. It brings up the fact that Ed and Al did human transmutation in a very not subtle way. Mustang asking Edward about getting his bodies back slightly takes away from the surprise that their bodies are even gone, especially Alphonse. They give a sneak peek of father for what? Like half a second, for what? There's even a sneak peek of the human transmutation scene that comes in episode 2. This episode shows you Kimberly really early, and most importantly, it introduces the concept of a city-wide transmutation. Like, why the f are we explaining gigantic future plot points so early when it's not needed? It's like watching a trailer that gives away too much. Like, there's a difference between foreshadowing and blatantly laying out framework, and the way it's done here is not with thoughtful writing. And these things get 10 times more infuriating for me when I watch the second episode of the show, because it should have been the first. The second episode sets up the lore and the story in this perfect way. I watched the first episode and almost gave up on the show as a whole. I watched the second episode and had to thank God I wasn't impatient. We didn't need action for action's sake. We didn't need Isaac McDougal. Yes, his last name's McDougal. We just needed the show to not be scared of being itself. It feels like a moment that was meant to appeal to the masses, but I actually don't think this show ever needed the extra push to appeal to the masses. I can't see a masses that wouldn't fall in love with Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. Currently, Frieren has taken the top spot, actually for a while now, from Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood on my anime list. Do I think it deserves it? Yeah, kinda, I do. But also, I think Brotherhood is probably one of, if not the best anime of all time. time. That being said, I appreciate that Frieren dared to be itself right from the beginning. There are people that complained about it being slow, but that didn't matter because it was what it was intended to be. Whereas this first episode just doesn't feel like that, because when something is great, it's undeniable. And if you don't get past the first episode, you can sadly deny Brotherhood of its greatness. In hindsight, I will repeat, I wish episode 1 wasn't there. I wish I got to watch it with no knowledge or context right from episode 2 right into the thick of it all. Crazy enough, it wasn't until way later that I discovered the plot points of this episode actually don't even exist in the manga at all. They're completely exclusive to the 2009 anime, and that kind of hurt me even more, because for years I was confused why this one episode felt so out of place for me, and then I found the truth. It's a f***ing filler. They started the show with a f***ing filler. And listen, I'm not a purist. The manga actually has a different order than the show entirely. Episode 2 of the show is like 20 chapters into the manga, but I felt like the show was actually onto something with that. I think that plot point coming up earlier in the show was really cool, and it probably would have been an amazing first episode. Just imagine it. Imagine that being the first thing that you watched. If you haven't seen the show, I hope you skip the excessive spoiler section of this video and will watch this show from episode 2, because it's a treat that not many of us will ever have. And fine, I won't be all complaints. There are a few positive things, I guess, about this episode. 1, Ed going to Hugh and Gracia's house. That was sweet, very welcomed. 2, comedy, solid, always love seeing our characters. 3, fights, cool, they fight well. 4, Armstrong, awesome. Always love Armstrong, top 1. 5, last intro scene, kind of cool, yeah, I guess. But that's it. That's it for me. And honestly, it isn't enough to save that first episode, like not by a long shot. In the end, starting Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood with a filler episode feels like a missed opportunity. This show is a masterpiece, so why lead with something that doesn't reflect its strengths? It's like serving a cheap appetizer before a Michelin-starred meal. It just doesn't do it justice. If they had started the show with episode 2, I think Brotherhood would have hooked even more viewers right away. It sets the tone, builds the world, and it introduces the stakes, all without spoiling key plot points, pretending like it's foreshadowing, and not forcing any unnecessary action. There's an interview somewhere in which Kanye West talks about how Bound 2 was originally supposed to be the first track for Yeezus. I know this is kind of unrelated, but he was really aware that if he had done that, people's perception of the album would have been 10 times better, because that's what an intro does. It really sets the scene. Now, Kanye ended up going a completely different route with this intro, but it still felt intentional and true to the art form he was releasing, whereas this intro episode just really does it. Anyways, if you're someone who hasn't seen Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood yet, I will repeat, skip episode 1 and please start with episode 2. If you're part of the majority that has likely seen Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, what are your thoughts on this? Did you feel the same way when you watched episode 1? Does this make you rethink your feelings about it? At the end of it all, we're still going to look back at the show as the classic that it is, with all the accolades that it deserves to have. Because when FMA Brotherhood is true to itself, it's undeniable. It didn't need the filler to stand out. It's a masterpiece from start to finish. Just skip the start. If you want to stay tapped in all things anime and awesome in general, hit that like button and please subscribe.